Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to know where you think we got it right and where you think we completely missed the mark, which you can do by going to unsilentpodcast.com, Rumble, Facebook, various different social channels. And with that, let's talk about the state of the world. Brian, shall we?
Yeah. Well, last week you left us off. We didn't quite get to it last week. We wanted to hear from the Randy Weingarten, the teachers union spokesperson or president, whatever her role is.
She's the president of the American Federation of Teachers. And so,
okay, perfect.
But the context of this, I think it's important. The context of all this is that we're in an era after President Trump's the attempted assassination of President Trump, where everybody's talking about kind of toning down the rhetoric, toning it down a little bit. And so let's see how one of our
we're lowering
leaders,
the temperature. If I got the phrase correctly, I think that's
we're lowering the temperature. Okay. So let's see how that kind of looks. Okay, here we go.
In the door. The violence comes later, after they are voted in. Voting is still our best defense against tyranny and fascism, and it's our best offense to create the better future we dream of and march for. Progress is possible, but not guaranteed. When the history books are written about this moment, let them record that we the people united, mobilized, and voted down this existential threat to democracy and freedom, that we continued the march for progress, that we laid the foundation for a better future, and that we sought to create a more perfect union. Progress is possible. Keep marching.
So unfortunately, the people who are listening on audio only can't see her bouncing around like a crazy person.
Like a crazy person?
Yeah. And what not making any comparisons as to personality or goodness or righteousness or whatever, but that kind of bouncing around and that animated arm flailing and things like that reminds me of a certain guy from over in Europe in the 30s and others like that, where they're really animated, their hands start flailing and they start speaking in such dramatic hyperbole and
right.
The behavioral patterns are so similar. It's funny.
Well, it could have. I almost started reaching for my wallet because I thought maybe they're going to ask for a donation, or maybe there's going to be the plate's going to pass around. We're going to have a revival meeting or something. It was sort of a religious euphoria experience that we saw there. Now, but of course, she's not involved in any kind of profession that is that one would think would be calm, respectable, fact-based kind of.
Right.
She's not involved. She's only involved in schools, right? So
right. It's funny when I see those things, the like super exaggerated animated gestures and things like that. And again, I'm poking fun of the guy in the 30s in Germany, but the guy in Cuba was no different. The guy in China was no different. The guy in Venezuela is no different. It's this super animated, like, again, you and I have talked about how emotion trumps facts right now in this moment in time. And if you don't carry that kind of emotion, like, you risk not being taken seriously, I guess, is what they're thinking. I don't know. It's a show.
It is a show. And this is the thing, everything that we're seeing right now in the presidential election, in both sides of the presidential election, it's all a show. Everything is a show. It's staged. It's manipulated. And it's all to gain power. The funny thing that you might, in her speech, and compare that to a lot of what we're hearing in the presidential election. And there's one thing that seems to be missing. What do you think that is? What do you think I've got on my mind about the one thing that's missing, Brian?
Well, facts is always the thing that stands out to me, like
Yeah,
data and
facts.
facts and an action plan with identifiable outcomes that we want to aim for and things like that.
Yeah, usually we think of people in this position and other positions, leadership positions, as putting forth policies,
Yeah,
putting forth, here's our problem. We've identified this problem. We're here because we are the smart people. We are the
yeah,
ones that have risen through society because our ideas are better. Our understanding of the world is better. And therefore, because it's better, we have these great fact-based, policy-based ideas that's going to
yeah.
improve the situation. I hear nothing about improving the
No,
situation. I hear
no.
everywhere we have to avoid fascism. We have to avoid the dictator. We've got to, your group is going to be out because of somebody compared single people to crazy cat women.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever it happens to be, it's all 100% emotion, devoid of actual policy prescriptions and logic. And
Right,
that is, I would say to Kenny G in the future, when you have moved into a post-logic society, when you've moved into a post-rational society, a post-scientific society, which we really have, then you are in a crisis era. That's where we're at.
right. Yeah, it's funny that all these things, the behaviors, the traits, the tendencies, they all align with these folks who want, revolution, essentially, right?
Yes, right,
And they're not for building anything, they're just for destroying stuff. And
right,
I don't mean that like they're just out to wreck everything. I mean, but the outcomes they seek are it's just a generic destroy what has been.
right,
It's not a specific here's what can be. And we talked
right,
about that a few weeks ago. Like, when I first started voting in 1992, it was a competition of a vision,
right,
and now it's just a competition of who can destroy the other person's or the other tribe's thing.
right.
It's taking down the other tribe's thing, not building anything. There's no there's no mention of here's what life would be like for people other than you just won't have to deal with that nonsense anymore.
Right. Well, and it's and even when you do talk about policy prescriptions or policies you don't like, it's targeted in an ad hominem way. Ad hominem in
Right,
Latin means at the person. So it's the idea is that this person believes in this policy, so therefore they're a bad person, don't vote for them. Or
right,
this person believes in this bad policy, so therefore they're a bad person, don't vote for them. So we can't give power to bad people. The policy prescriptions almost become, if when they do come out, when they do say this is something we do or don't want to do, they're almost only to support the power or the threat, the power of our person and the threat of the other person.
yeah. And I would also throw out there there's only a few plausible reasons why they wouldn't articulate the outcomes that they want. Either A, they don't know what they are, and
Right,
they just know what they don't like, which is
right,
whatever. We're bringing down the statues because we don't want that, but we don't know what kind of statues we'd want up instead, or we don't know
right.
what kind of beautification we would want instead, or what kind of historical symbolism would be appropriate in its place. We have no idea what that would be, or what they actually want is so heinous that people would reject it if they actually said it out loud.
Right, right. Well, yeah, it's one of the reasons, even if they do have ideas about what should happen, they don't want to say those ideas because it
Right,
will undermine them. So, take one of the big things that nobody will talk about in this election cycle, that everybody knows is broken, but nobody will talk about are the Social Security and entitlement programs.
right,
Everybody knows they're broken. Everybody knows we're going to have a crisis. Everybody, there's no disagreement on that, but nobody will talk about it
right.
because you're going to give the other side even if you have a reasonable idea, we're going to raise the retirement age 1 year. Well, you're going to push grandma off the cliff.
Yep. Yeah,
Grandma's
yeah, yeah.
going to die, is going to starve. They're going to be, our streets are lined with elderly people, fighting the homeless for a last scrap of food. So
Right.
there's no, even with things where everybody agrees on, there can be no
And,
discussion of it.
and by the way, I would say that that's the fault of the populace because we can't
Sure.
handle the truth.
Right.
As soon as
Right.
somebody says something like that, well, that guy's got to go. Like instead
Right.
of acknowledging that the stuff is broken, and what we have, like Social Security is a great example. It's potentially, if not likely, the worst investment plan ever. You
Right.
know,
It's
people
exactly
pay tens of thousands of dollars a year, employers and whoever pays all this money so that somebody could end up with $1,400 a month after 40 years. Like,
right.
name a worse retirement plan than that. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But if you had an idea, like, okay, we're gonna mandate that people put aside X amount of dollars from their paycheck, just like we do now. But instead of giving you Social Security, we're gonna force you to put in some kind of retirement plan where you invested in the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq
Right.
or an ETF fund for people who are going to retire the year 2060 or something like that.
Right.
And you'd have to be responsible for your own money. But the law would require you to put money aside for that to build your own wealth. You would end up with millions of dollars at the end of the 40 years
Right.
instead of the $1,400 government paycheck. And you would not need all the bureaucracy, and your returns would be infinitely better than what they are. But those conversations can't even be had because that would require
No.
effort on the part of the populace, and like none of us want that. Like we just want all the stuff without the effort. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, I think that's really true. I think, and you mentioned it a moment ago, the fault is really in us,
Yeah.
because in our society we are so sort of Snapchat oriented. We used to
Right.
say, before the internet, was the microwave generation. Nobody has the
Yeah. Yeah.
time to wait for 30 minutes for something to cook. Now we got to wait for 2 minutes until the microwave is done. But
Yeah.
that's a long time for the Snapchat generation, which is, you send something, you see it, it's there for a minute, it's gone. And that's the time, that's the attention span that we've got. So
Right.
in that kind of generation, it's no wonder that we are in a situation where, we demand those in political power only address my felt need as of today. And my only
Right.
felt need is really to be angry at somebody for how crappy my life is.
Yeah, and you think about how it plays out in real life. We have all these politicians right now and lawmakers and bureaucrats and all this stuff speaking in such vague generalities that you
Right.
like your clip there is a great example where it's just we generally don't like this. We have no idea what we would want instead.
Right.
If somebody were to come forward with a very specific policy plan and say, "Hey, instead of doing X, we should do Y," if they're the only ones doing that, they would they would stand no chance of being elected
Right.
because the population is not really interested in that. And so, there is a part of me that kind of comes back to, well, this is what we're forcing. Like we are the ones
Yeah.
because we want the benefit without the effort. And
Right.
so, it's hard to blame the politicians for giving us exactly what we want. This is
Yeah.
a person who didn't do that would not stand a chance to be elected.
And we won't change until there's an existential threat that makes us
Yeah.
change. I mean, that's part of the problem. Well,
Yeah.
and, to your point of also the kind of how the politicians presented, it's also interesting to see in what a short period of time that's happened. So you'll remember, you're an Obama voter back in the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So back in 2008, when he was running, it was 2007. His motto was hope and change.
Yeah.
So
Yes, we
it
can, or
was,
something like that, right?
yes, we can, hope and
Yeah.
change. Oh, all that,
Yeah.
so it wasn't as much demonization as exists right now. Hope and
Right.
change wouldn't work now. So even in that period of time, the public had some kind of appetite for, let's do something positive, even if it was, vacuous and vague hope and change. Well,
Right.
what the heck does that mean? What are you going to actually do?
Right.
But there was some kind of positivity with that. Now it's like, fascism and totalitarianism. That's the thing we're focusing on. They're
Yeah.
going to be
And
totalitarian. No,
and
they are.
and and by the way, like, I remember when the Patriot Act came out. What was that, 2002 or something like that?
Yeah.
I'll never forget a conversation I had in the office of the company I worked at with other people who were talking about what a great thing this Patriot Act was. And I said, "Well, wait a second here. Though my understanding is it limits the rights of US citizens." Like
Right.
like so they dangle this carrot and this stick of like, well, we can't have this outcome that we're all afraid of, and we're going to put this plan in place. But as a collective population, we were not really interested in doing any research to find out what the actual ramifications
Right.
were.
Right.
And we end up with this thing that actually restricted our rights even more. But we end up with it because we didn't want to do the research ourselves, and we didn't take the time
Exactly.
to investigate and go, wait a second here. They're actually going to be tapping our cell phone lines. They're not reaching over to Azerbaijan.
Right. Right. Well, and I think it goes to the point that even in a non-crisis era, so that was, before this sort of current angst
Yeah.
that we're in right now, even in a non-crisis era, people want sound bites, simple solutions.
Yeah.
They want, and they just want to feel better. I mean, people just want to feel better ultimately.
Right.
So like after 9/11, we're scared. Our confidence as a country is shaken. Yeah, sure. You tap everybody, to tap me.
Right.
I don't care. I don't have anything to hide,
Right.
and all of that, because we just want to feel better. And then you get into a crisis era where no good crisis goes to waste. I mean, that's always been the case, but now so
Yeah.
much more. It's just like you have to hype. There comes a time, I think, O'Brien, that that it's been hyped so much. I mean, where do you go from the other side is fascist and is going to
Well,
put
I
you in
think that
camp?
that's how this stuff culminates in the atrocities it ultimately does,
Yes. Yeah.
because you have to ratchet things up so high that the natural order of things is when people are that scared or think that
Yeah.
there's that big of a threat, people that are not as reserved as others start doing really heinous things, and then
Yeah.
that requires retaliation, and then it's the shot on Fort Sumter all over again,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So we have the illustration there of the hyperbole and the exaggerated body movements and like the jumping up and
Right.
down at the podium, and we got to do all this stuff to a bunch of emotion and exuberance, but no content really. No,
Right. Yep.
there's not much thought behind it. And then you couple that with, I have a couple of things here that what AI and big dominant tech companies are doing.
Right.
So this person put in that was doing a thing with AI, that I think this is the Meta AI thing, where it was asking about the Trump assassination.
Oh yeah, that
And
was on Google too.
yeah, so it's kind of all over the place. So you have the high emotion, low content
Yeah.
example you have, and then you have this other thing where it this meta AI appears, again. This is on the internet, so who knows how true it is, but appears to be saying like, well, we don't really know if the Trump assassination really happened,
Right.
and so this person's talking to this meta AI bot or whatever it is, and their question is, why is there rich and structured information about the Harris campaign, Kamala Harris,
Right.
but not about the Trump assassination attempt? And the response from AI was, the reason for the disparity in information is due to the fact that the Trump assassination attempt is a fictional event, whereas Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign is a real and ongoing event.
Oh
And
wow, I
so
didn't see that
you
one.
have that. And then Elon Musk, the owner of X.com, put this out today, as we're recording today, put this out. He did a search in Google for Trump rally,
Yeah.
and the top results were Kamala Harris's rally in Atlanta. And so you have on one hand that the hyperbolic, exaggerated, emotional
Right.
outbursts that you're saying, and then if a person really does want to like find factual information, the tech companies are telling them they're crazy, that
Right.
stuff doesn't really exist. And it goes back to me to, like, you and I talked a couple weeks ago about the book 1984 was
Yeah.
written in like 1949, right after their crisis era.
Yeah.
And so he was just kind of extrapolating, looking forward, what this would look like in future generations. And I think there's a line in there like the final and ultimate request or requirement was that you not believe your own eyes or something like
Right.
that.
Right.
And that's what's unfolding here. It's like you look at
Yeah.
these things like, what do you mean he did? I saw the blood. I saw him get pummeled by the Secret Service. They piled on him to, and but they're saying that's a fictitious event. So
Right.
it's unfolding as in the same way we kind of mock and scoff other social environments, countries,
Yeah.
and cultures and things like that. Like, how could they be so stupid and fall for that stuff?
Right.
And it's happening right here in
Yeah.
real time for us. And so it's not only playing on our laziness with the emotional outburst thing you have there, but if somebody sees this, like, they're not going to put the effort in to go find a different source. They're like, oh, I
Right.
guess it was all made up, and they're on with their day.
Yeah, because as soon as we've determined who is credible, and whoever's
Right.
credible is not the person that presents the best resume of fact over the last X number of years, but it's who we want to believe. And
Yeah.
so, who's ever credible, we're going to believe them. And now, from just they can feed you whatever they want to feed you, and you're going to be predisposed to listen to it. Now, that's a cognitive bias that we all have. And
Yeah.
the only way to get over that cognitive bias is to look at things from sources that you normally wouldn't look at and determine whether or not, try to triangulate a little bit. I mean, so I listen to plenty of conservative sources. I also listen to a variety of, not screaming, communists, but people that are news sources that are left
just loud
leaning.
communists, not screaming
No,
communists.
yeah, not the scream. The screaming ones give me a headache and make my ears bleed. But just the ones that are loud, like we watch, I'll listen to them for a little bit. Because if you don't have any way of saying, well, is my cognitive bias holding me back?
Right.
Then, can I be reasonably accused of the same thing that I'm saying? How can you be so crazy as to actually believe this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a I had a thing happen this weekend I want to tell you about. It's kind of funny. So I went up to a little town called Prescott, Arizona. I went there for a concert, and it's kind of a little touristy town. There's, the hat shop and the ice cream shop and stuff like that. And there was people outside, just on the sidewalk, volunteers with a clipboard in hand, and they're walking up to people. Hey, are you a registered voter in the state of Arizona and whatever? And I said, yeah, I heard it. First time I heard them do this was to somebody else, and the guy said, yeah, I'm a registered voter. And they said, hey, well, we're doing a petition. Would you sign our petition to allow a third party candidate on the ballot for president? And that was their opening pitch. Now you're in the marketing space, so that the headline of any ad is like 80% of your marketing dollar,
Right,
right?
exactly.
If the headline doesn't grab attention, then like nothing else matters,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So the headline of this ad, even though it was verbal, was, will you sign this thing to allow a third party candidate to be on the ballot?
Right.
And so the person signs it. Oh yeah, of course. Who wouldn't want that? Like the more voices, the better, right?
Right.
So I'm sitting on a bench, and then they come over to me and they say the same thing to me. Same opening pitch. Would you sign our petition to allow a third party candidate on the ballot?
Right.
And so I said, well, what do you mean a third? You mean like any third party candidate, or do you have one in mind specifically? Oh no, it's Cornell West from Harvard, and they kind of in a more demure tone said it was Cornell West, and
Right.
he's of the People's Party. And I said, and I'm sitting there, I'm kind of chuckling to myself, not making a big deal, but just kind of chuckling to myself, like, why wouldn't the headline be, do you want Cornell West on your ballot?
Right.
Well, there's an obvious reason for that, right? And so then I asked the nice young lady who was collecting signatures, I said, well, what are the top 1, 2, or 3 things that Cornell West is running on? And she said, well, he wants to end poverty, and he wants to end the class wars, and he wants to he wants to invest heavily in green energy. And so it must have been my body language and my whatever, because I just kind of started chuckling a little bit. I'm like, well, what's the actual policy though? Like, how do you end? Like, who
How are you
doesn't
gonna
want
do
to end
that?
poverty? Everyone says they want to end poverty. Like,
Right.
what are the actual things that are going to bring that about?
Right.
And there's no answer. And she finally just goes, well, will you sign my petition? I said, and I must have sound like a jerk, because I just said, and I kind of laughed. No, not for Cornell West. She was like, oh, like I'm the weirdo, right? And so then these people were all over this little town. Again, there's only like 4 blocks of the main little area. And then I went to the concert hall where I was going to watch the concert, and the same group went there. So this is a music concert for country music, and this is largely going to be probably Republican kind of conservative kind of folks.
Yeah.
And again, the pitch was, would you sign this signature? Would you sign our whatever those things, what's it called, initiative or whatever, petition to allow a third party person? Well, by now people have kind of gotten wise to what they were asking, and so they started. Why won't you just say the guy's name? Like, what? Why won't you just come out and say, like, if you're so proud of this guy, like, why wouldn't that be the headline? Like, hey, here's our chance to get what we need done and have our guy in there. We've already identified. It was so subversive and so manipulative how they went about it. And I'm just like, this is a great little encapsulation of the moment we're living in, where they do these little sleight of hand things with the language, and they change up the things a little bit, because they know that if you heard what they really want, you would say no. But so they don't say what you really want or what they really want. They find a way to kind of end around with the language to make it seem like, oh, of course, who would want a third party person on the ballot? It's just the world we live in now. It's crazy.
Well, it's interesting because that level of manipulative prowess, if you will. I mean, obviously it didn't work, but so it's not they're not
It
terribly
worked on,
successful.
I would say it worked on over 70% of the people that I saw
Really?
them as.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
But that level of manipulative, that technique and level of manipulative prowess didn't used to be at such a low level. It used
Right.
to be the national politicians. I mean, Cornel West is sort of a national politician, but doesn't have any following really.
Right.
But all of those things, but those are the tools that the internet has put in, and mass media has put in the hands of everybody, has put in the
Yeah.
hands of literally everybody. And so in fact, news sources do this all the time. Speaking of headlines, you mentioned 80% in the headline. One of the things you used to be able to do was read a newspaper or read or listen to the headline news at the beginning of the news hour or something and get the gist of everything that's going on.
Right.
Now, regardless of what channel you watch, any of the big ones, it's all clickbait. So
Yeah.
whatever, there'll be some vague statement. And, I make it into a game these days. I look at it and say, okay, I think this is really what they're saying. News channels that I like, channels that I generally think have at least some decent information, they'll do
Yeah.
this. And it's all about, making you stay on the site, because there's SEO advantages to stay on the site and all that type of stuff.
Yep.
So that didn't used to be the way, you used to be able to read the headlines in the newspaper, go through 4 or 5 pages. You're reasonably well informed and you didn't even read the articles. That
Right.
is not even part of the process anymore.
No. And what I can with a high degree of certainty, I can predict how this unfolds. They dope people into signing this thing to just allow a third party candidate. Like they
Right.
don't declare who it is, but when it hits the news, it's going to be Cornel West has collected 250,000 signatures. People are really interested in what he has to say, and people are really behind him. And it's like that's not how it was framed at all. That's not
Total
exactly at all how it was
manipulation.
presented.
It's total manipulation. I listened to an interesting podcast recently of a PR guy who basically he was a PR guy that I don't remember his name offhand, but he's a PR guy that would represent anybody, and his firm represented some very unsavory people. And he was
Yeah.
on talking about that, and he basically said, "Look, in whatever is happening, whatever news you hear, and whatever things are happening in Congress, et cetera," he said, "There's absolutely, and it's not big conspiracy stuff. It's just standard practice. Here's how stuff happens currently. If there's a headline and it's sort of out of the blue, unless it's like Martians invade and Tom Cruise has been called on to repel them or whatever, it's going to be manipulated. It's going to be manipulative. And so that's the era we live in.
And orchestrated. The new trend that's happened this week is now that JD Vance has been chosen as a VP. Now the talking point is that he's weird.
Yeah,
that word weird. And so I saw an article earlier about the number of times that he's been called weird went from 0 9 days ago to something like hundreds of times if you look at all the different corporate media and whatever. And so it's manipulative, but it's also orchestrated where they're all saying the same talking points over and over and over and over again. And again, the effort it takes to find out the truth. Again, people they have lives, they have kids, they have grandkids, they have baseball games they want to take their kids to, and they have dinners that they want to have with their family, and they have things they want to do with their friends and hobbies they want to pursue. The burden on a regular person to figure out what is right now is off the charts more difficult than it's ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah. Well, and don't you think that, there's 2 outcomes that they, quote unquote, now I'm starting to sound like, but that they want. One of them is to make it so that you believe them. The other one is so that you're so confused that you just check out and let them do what they want.
You don't believe anyone. Right.
You don't believe anything.
Yeah.
You just you check out, let them do what you want. Or you let them do what they want to do. So in either of those outcomes goes to the power of the elites that essentially want to control everything. And again, there's nothing, kind of black hat about that in the sense of, it's men in black or whatever. It's human lust for power that causes this, that's caused the Spanish Inquisition and all the wars in history, religious wars, and it's all back to human nature. And when
Right.
human nature becomes so completely unchecked and completely unbounded by societal sort of guardrails, that you enter into a crisis here like we have right now. And so that's that can only end one way. And then human nature, the only thing that's more powerful than humans' desire for power and lust for control is human survival. it's,
Yeah.
it's like at that point when it's like, no, we can't do this anymore as a society. The survival instinct kicks in and say, well, let's do what worked before and let's rebuild society, and then we'll ruin it in 80 years or so.
Right. Yeah. So that's an an interesting thing that is coming to light again. This some of the stuff borders on becoming a conspiracy nut and tinfoil hat nut and all that kind of stuff. And I try to be objective and pragmatic in the
Yeah,
approach, but
right.
some of the things you can't deny the similarities,
Oh,
right?
sure, sure.
When they show you the playbook the CIA has used to overthrow a government somewhere
Right,
else, it's strikingly similar to what we're
right,
experiencing now,
right.
where you confuse, you plant little seeds of information, you manipulate, you bombard people with propaganda, and all these things are seemingly happening to us here now in our own country, but at the same time, we kinda have that, which you and I talk about all the time, like, "Well, they wouldn't do that, right?"
Right,
But we'll do it everywhere else, so why wouldn't they do it here? But you
right.
you can't be the person who jumps too fast and says that they're doing it, because if it turns out that that's not true, then you look crazy, and
Yeah,
they know that that's a sequence of emotions that people are gonna go through, so this stuff is very calculated, and
yeah.
if it's happenstance, it's an awfully big coincidence that this is how we've done it other places.
Well, it would have to be the grandest coincidence of all time because, I mean, if you see even on a very basic level, if you see media source after media source after media source, like you were talking about earlier, using the exact same phrase,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden, then if you don't think that's coordinated, then you're an idiot. I
right.
mean, if all I heard them talking about VP Harris now, candidate Harris, and so many people in the media. It's a cultural moment. It's a cultural moment. So there's
Right.
last week. It's like, what are we going to do? Are we stuck with her? What are we going to do?
Yeah,
Now it's a cultural moment. We just have to reframe. We have to memory hole everything.
yeah,
I'm sorry. If you say that she's the border czar, ugh, that's kind of that, no,
yeah,
that's,
yeah,
you memory holing everything. And it's always amazing to me how folks can get away with that. But
yeah.
then if you think about it, the number of people in the country that are interested in, like, political podcasts, political television shows, and all of that, or
Right.
political, radio shows is a very, very tiny
Yeah.
percentage. Very
Yeah.
tiny. More people get their news from Snapchat and Twitter than just, most large news sources. So
Right.
it's sort of inevitable because people are indeed distracted until some big event comes along to gain their attention, and by then it's really too late to save the current
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking this week, and before I get onto that one of my favorite things about this moment in time, this last couple of years, and I suspect it'll be this way for a few more years, is the same people who were saying, who are denouncing those who are calling Kamala Harris the border czar. They're
Right,
saying, well, she was never the border czar. There's now video clips of them saying that she was never that, and then followed by a 7-second video clip of
yeah,
that network saying it as it happened in real
yeah,
life. That's one of my favorite things about this era we're living in is the there's so much video out there now. I mean,
yeah,
and there has been
exactly.
for like 10, 15 years. Like things that people said 15 years ago
Right,
is quickly brought to the surface when they say something contradictory. And so you have the CNNs of the world saying, well, she was never declared the border czar, followed by a 7-second clip of them explaining that she was just now
right,
in 2021 or whatever year it was. Now she's now been named the border czar. And
right.
it was like a 2.5 minute clip of each quote unquote news source saying she was never the border czar, followed by them saying she was the border czar
Right.
3 years ago. I wonder how much, if at all, because that stuff is like, that's like parody. That's like
Oh, yeah,
comedy.
yeah,
That's
satire.
not quite news. I wonder if that stuff will get more traction for folks who aren't really tuned in. than like the straight up news headlines that we all know are manipulated and orchestrated and things like that, because it's kind of more organic. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
a person might share that on their Twitter feed, and their friends would see that where they wouldn't otherwise see it, and it is funny. It's funny to see
Oh,
these
it's
people being
hilarious.
complete buffoons of themselves.
It's hilarious, but I don't think it'll penetrate. I don't, and the reason I don't think those things penetrate is because the people, the algorithms that determine what you see and what I see on X. I mean, Musk has probably, liberalized that so that conservatives
Yeah,
aren't memory hold completely, but on Twitter, on or on X, on Facebook, on Instagram, on these other social channels, or even in the newspapers, if something comes up that they can't hide from anymore, well, it's on page 42 in,
right.
3-point type. So yes, they acknowledge it, but they acknowledge it in a way that nobody sees it. So
Yeah,
even if the truth is too blatant to ignore, then what do? All you have to do is make sure that nobody sees it.
right,
And with modern technology, that's not at all out of the question. It
right.
happens all the time.
Yeah, getting back to the thing I was thinking about earlier this week, that I'm holding out hope that there's kind of this bit of human nature that's, I wouldn't say is uniquely American, but it's definitely exaggerated or emphasized in our culture relative to others. Is I think that they're underestimating, they being like corporate media and like the
Yeah.
big tech companies, things like that. I think they're underestimating how much Americans truly crave the underdog story. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think
you
that's
think of
true.
all of the great movies that have ever made, like the best. What, in your opinion, Dave? What's the best sports movie ever made?
Oh my word. I can think of 3 or 4. I'm not sure, but I can think of 3 or
All right.
4 that are.
So, like would Rocky? I mean, Rocky is one that
Oh,
would
yeah.
people would
Oh,
say
yeah.
for sure.
I mean, Rocky's the quintessential one.
Okay,
Yes, absolutely.
so Rocky is an underdog story. You
Yeah.
have the
Big
arrogant
time.
Apollo Creed, and then this guy is barely making rent and whatever,
Yeah.
and he's pushed down by the man. He's working at the meat factory or
Sure.
whatever it was,
Yeah.
and the next thing you know, he's the heavyweight champ of the world.
Right.
If you look at other like more like sci-fi, like you have, you know, Star Wars. It's
Yeah.
all about how the Jedi were,
They're
cast
wiped
aside
out.
and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the underdog story of the resurrection of these people who had good morals and good character
Right.
and standard, strict principles they adhered to, and how the universe had done them wrong, and they get theirs in the end.
Yeah.
I any genre of movie you look at, that is whether it's a rom-com, like
Yeah.
the boy and girl are dating, and then he does
Oh, sure.
something stupid, and he's, finds himself chasing some other girl, and then but at the end they get together the way it's supposed to, live happily ever after. Like
Yeah.
all of these stories have a similar through line as far as
Sure.
the underdog gets pushed down, and then we're rooting for the underdog at the end. And what do
Right.
you know? At the end of the movie, it
Right.
it ends the way that makes us all feel good. I I'm hopeful. I wouldn't say that I expect this to happen, but I'm hopeful that that will somehow play a factor here, and they will push so far on Christians and
Yeah.
Jews and these folks who have these principles that they believe in. Not that they're perfect, they're not.
Right.
They're human like everyone else,
Yep.
but they have this idea that there is a force greater than government that
Yes.
is the arbiter of what is good and evil,
Yeah.
and those folks will be pushed down so far that our society tends to end up rooting for those people.
Yeah.
No different than after 9/11, when there was a backlash against all the, the Muslim people, and everyone was talking about the mosques and all this kind of stuff. It took less than a week for them to become like everyone rooting for them. Like, no, like
Yeah.
we can show that we're here to support these people.
Right.
Do you think that's too pie in the sky, Dave? Do you think that that
No.
might be something that saves us?
Well, yeah, I think yes, I do think it's not pie in the sky, and I do think that's something that can save us. And I'll tell you one of the major reasons that I think that's true. Standing on its own, just by itself, that's a powerful thing. But when you couple that with the elite overreach, where those that have been manipulating society and manipulating the news and manipulating everything for such a very long period of time, when they begin to believe, and I think they do, that hey, we're in control here. Traditional people,
Yeah,
you're out, we're in.
yeah,
You're out, we're in. We'll do whatever we want. See, I think that arrogance of that, and the self importance of that. I mean, we saw it during COVID. We saw what happened
Right.
during COVID. The arrogance and the we know everything. Just do what we say and
Right.
trust us forever because we know that does backfire. You combine that with this, we're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
That combination is what I think oftentimes turns the corner. And I think it happens in a very, very fast fashion in a
Yeah.
way that it gets out of control by the powerful and the elite. I think it just turns on a
Yeah.
dime, a tipping point, they say.
Yeah. There's no way I could predict what the specific event would be, but I could
Yeah,
totally see a situation where the elites, the media types, the Hollywood types, the deep state types, this
yeah,
whatever this blob is that's effectively controlling the narrative, they will push things so far. They will hurt a group of people bad enough
right.
that people will say this is bullshit and it has to stop.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
no idea what that would look like, but I'm hopeful that that happens because that could turn the tide in a non-violent kind of way,
right.
where if we don't have something like that happen that turns the tide, then we're left with not very good outcomes as far as, resolving all this.
Well, and I think part of what happens in those situations is that it turns the tide for people that they don't expect will ever abandon them. In other
Yeah,
words, so okay, we've lined up everybody to support our cause, and they're all lockstep because where else are they going to go? They're not going to go over to the people that we've told them hate them.
yeah,
We've lined all these folks up, and so now we can just focus on these people. But these people over here are humans. I don't care, your race, your religion, your, ethnicity, they're all still humans. And there is a certain human thing that's like, I see you're treating these people badly. You say, that they've been treating us badly, but I see you treating them badly.
yeah,
I don't like that very much anymore. Maybe my support for you was misplaced, and
right,
the questioning, just because I think all of that is built. I think all that control is built on a very thin veneer. It's not miles deep. It's inches deep and miles wide. And so therefore, when it gets burst, it gets upset, then that whole kind of control system, I think, is very fragile. I don't think it has
yeah.
legs to it.
We saw something not exactly what you're describing, but something happened about a week ago. So after Biden announces he's not going to run, President Biden says he's going to finish his term, but he's not going to run for reelection. And like it or not, Kamala Harris was more or less installed. Like
Yep.
there was a guy who got 579,000 votes, Dean, whatever his name is, that he was the second place finisher in the primaries that they ran on the Democratic ticket, and that that's just not even a factor. They
Right.
decided
Right.
that those votes don't count for what it. Again, I'm not saying they broke the law. It, I'm sure they did everything the quote unquote correct way, but the outcome is they installed a person. Like
Yeah.
we
They
can
did.
we
Yeah.
can dance
Yeah.
around all we want, but they
Yeah.
installed a person and did not follow the principles of democracy that they
Right.
always are railing
Yeah.
about, right?
Exactly.
So after that happened, like a day or two after that happened, a funny group stood up and said, "We don't like that you've installed Kamala Harris
Mm.
here without having a proper voting process." And that group was Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. I saw that.
And I was like, "Wait a second, that's fascinating. I mean, this is right in their wheelhouses of constituency.
Yeah.
These are folks. I wonder, like you were saying, like we had all of our ducks lined up in a row, and somehow we didn't pay attention to the fact that this
Yeah.
this particular duck wasn't sitting there as strongly as we thought, and so in a week's time you have that happening, them announcing publicly that they don't like this installation,
Right.
and then the launch of this white dudes for Harris campaign that is like, how how out of touch can you be
Yeah.
that's just a an odd way to try to trump up support, no pun intended, but
Yeah.
to garner support while the group that they always say dance with the one that brought you. Well, the one that brought you is sitting here saying we don't like how this is going, and now
Right.
we're inviting this group of white dudes of all thing to demonstrate this is the snowball effect of support that she's getting. It feels so incompetent to me. To how could
Yes.
you be
Yes.
orchestrating this stuff and have that be how it unfolds?
Well, and that's you. I think you hit it right on the head. It's if you think sometimes about well that this Leviathan, this monster is just so smart and so brilliant. There's a bunch of really stupid things that they're doing. I mean, I heard that call where Josh Groban and the guy that played Sam Gamgee, what's his name? A bunch of guys, they're lecturing me. They're, well, just go sing your song, go act in your movies. Just this is not really. It's not really projecting power or authority. It's not really
Right.
projecting confidence and logic. And so there are these sort of cartoonish things that then happen, which then I think push people again the other direction, the opposite direction that they think it will, because and ultimately it comes down to the fact that the worldview, the sort of perception of here's how things operate by folks that get into these hallowed halls of power it's not accurate. It's not how people really are.
Right.
People really are are more concerned with very basic things. They're concerned with like when we talk about elections, they're concerned about their family, about their economy, about the prospects of safety and these types of things. And so Sam Gamgee lectures me while I'm more concerned that there's gangs running in the street than I am about Sean Astin. I'm more, and I'm sure he's a very nice guy. I don't want to pick on him too much, but I'm more concerned about gangs running in the street and my purchasing power being 20% less than it was 4 years ago than I
Yeah.
am some rich actor lecturing me.
Right. Yeah, I think the one of the Achilles heels of the elite folks is they are just not tuned into what people really care about,
Yeah,
and they're
the
just
real
not
people.
tuned into the impact of these either intentional or accidental policies that end up with like the guy on who reordered his same he had saved his Walmart order from like 2021 or something like that, and it was $129 or whatever, and he put the same items in his cart to reorder them today on the app, and it was like $414 or something like that.
Yeah,
And that $300 difference is no big deal to the multimillionaire.
right.
It's no big deal to the Hollywood actor. It's no big deal to the government employee making $300,000 a year. It's no big deal to the Wall Street guy. It's a huge deal to the person, regardless what their ethnicity is,
Right.
who's making, $48,000 a year paycheck to paycheck.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and I think that's where those movements then end up falling apart. They start losing constituencies like the BLM thing. I mean, I saw that and I'm like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Because they're all made up of people that have real world concerns. And if you don't address those real world concerns and you just and if you treat people like they're stupid,
right.
you're probably going to start alienating a fair number of people.
Well, and this goes back to how we opened up the episode today is then you end up with situations where you have the talking head who has to exaggerate these other fears that are not
Right,
as pertinent to the person in their day-to-day life. You have to amplify those things, and the only way you can do that is through your animated gestures and
right.
hyperbolic language and ginning up this fear that is and trying to make that supersede the fear of the $300 difference in your grocery bill over 3 years.
Right. Well, and I think, kind of one of my last thoughts on that one is that you can't live in a perpetual state of fear
Right,
forever. I mean, so if you keep going to the fear well forever, and especially if it's fears that haven't, materialized, it's
right.
like, well, what was it Biden saying? They want to put you all back in chains. Well, it doesn't look like we're in chains. Maybe that was hyperbole.
Yeah,
Maybe he's trying to manipulate us,
yeah,
but you can't live in that kind of fear and for forever, especially when you have actual real existential concerns and issues that are affecting your life Monday through Friday.
yeah.
So that you can't go back to that well forever.
Yeah, I have noticed, and I don't know, again, who knows how the algorithm has me plugged into whatever the stuff I see, but I have noticed that there's not as much climate talk as there is these
Yeah,
other things, and I suspect part of that is that there's a pretty well documented now history of claims that there's going to be a catastrophic end to the earth in the next 12 years, going back
Right.
to like 1950 or whatever.
Right.
In 12 years, we're going to have this. In 14 years, we're going to have this. In 7 years, we're going to have this. And there's been so many iterations of that now that I think
Right.
the last one was we wouldn't have any oceans left or any icebergs left or something like that by the year 2022. And
Yeah.
people, again, some of the mocking things going around the internet are like, well, my calendar says it's 2024. Wasn't that
Right.
supposed to happen 2 years ago?
Right.
And those things are losing steam. And so they're amplifying the other stuff, which is mostly about race and religion and that kind of stuff, and
Right.
overhauling the government to end systemic this ism and that ism and whatever.
Yep.
It does kind of reek of desperation, which I
Yeah.
think is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's like, well, that's good. They're kind of exhausting themselves on this hyperbolic talk. On the other hand, if this stuff isn't working anymore, what's next?
Well, yeah, it is dangerous because either it doesn't work and they give up, or it doesn't work and they take drastic kinetic action.
Right.
And,
And I've not
that's
seen
what's
any
dangerous.
indication from people in power that they're interested in giving that up. It seems like only
Right.
natural they would go to the next most useful tool they have, which is going to be more dangerous and
Yeah.
cause more harm than hyperbolic hand gestures behind the podium.
That's history. That's history. We see it playing out
Yeah.
all over the world.
All right. Well, I think we in a relatively slow news. Again, this is not a news show by any stretch, but geez,
It's only slow if you compare it to last week.
yeah, the news cycle this week relative to the prior two, this
Yeah.
definitely slowed down some, but the indicators all around us are that we're still heading fast and furious towards whatever we're heading to.
Yep,
It's quite a ride, that's for sure. Well, as
it
Dave
is.
mentioned at the beginning, we do our best to try to articulate what this moment in time is like for future generations from our point of view. But of course, that's only two guys. So we'd love for you to chime in and tell us where you think we're getting it right, where you think we're getting it wrong. If you think we're misinterpreting something that's happening, or we missed something that's an obvious indicator of what this moment in time is like for Kenny G and other folks who live in the future, we'd sure love to hear about it. Unsilent Podcast, where you can do that. Rumble has a great comment section. And with that, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.